let's get started. Topic 1. Zillow, an American online real estate marketplace company, has drawn criticism for its venture in house flipping. The company bought up a glut of houses through the use of an algorithm. While at first it used humans to moderate its operations, they were eventually sidelined for a more aggressive computer-led buying spree. However, the company couldn't flip all the houses it bought in time. Costs skyrocketed and the company was forced to sell off its inventory at deep discounts and fire employees. All of this affected the housing prices in those areas. Do you think that this disaster was inevitable? Do you think capitalism's reliance on digitalized decision-making leaves it open to these catastrophes? Should this be a call for heavy regulation? And should anyone be punished for these actions? Okay, yeah. So this is a little bit of a complicated story. Once again, Zillow, you might have heard of it. You know, especially if you're American. I'm not sure if they operate in other countries, but certainly in America, they're a big, a website. You can like check the prices of your house, right? Which is like a popular thing. But also like gives business like real estate agents, like IRL real estate agents. Anyway, they decided to do house flipping themselves, right? So again, like they bought up houses. And which was fine at first, right? They had houses, they had contractors, and they were working with real estate agents. And then they had people like, because there was an algorithm like telling them what to buy, but they had like a person looking at these transactions and saying, okay, well, this is good. We'll roll with that, right? But they wanted to, be more aggressive with it, and they like kind of took the some of those protections out a place and started bidding very aggressively. So bidding high for these price for these houses. Anyway, they bought like a shitload, like 10,000 of these houses, right? And I think this is across the nation, but anyway, like 10,000, and they could not get rid of them fast enough, right? And so like when you own a house, as you know, like there's costs associated with that, and that started to pile up. And they couldn't like flip the houses fast enough. They didn't have enough crews to do it. They didn't have people. And then now they're selling those houses at a discount. It's a complete fucking mess. And of course, it's affected the housing market there. So we're wondering how people feel about that. All right. So opening statements. Start with Sneaky. Go ahead.
So I don't usually like to invoke this argument because it's a bit redundant, but for this case, I will invoke this argument. Capitalism is bad, boys. All right, it's bad. All right, it's because what's happened here, right? Is like a massive companies has like massively mismanaged its portfolio, and the damage has gone straight onto the people. Right, it's gone onto the workers of the company. It's gone onto the people who are competing in this housing market, and that's not good. That's not fucking good at all, right? I mean, like you could bail it out, and I know the fucking ANCAP's going to be against that. People are going to be against bailing out big companies, blah blah blah. But even then, right? Like the fact that this practice is allowed to exist, like I think highlights a pretty huge fucking issue with the system, right? This like housing is not a joke, right? When people don't have housing, they're homeless, or they end up living in like really shitty scenarios, which affects their health, affects their productivity, affects their contributions to society. I think there needs to be some pretty strict regulations put in place to stop this kind of thing happening. And it reminds me of a similar thing that happened in Germany with their like super landlords, right? And they had, I can't remember what it's called, but they got this like super landlord, and the super landlord owns like 80% of all the housing in like Munich or something like that. And they voted to expropriate it, but they just fucking lobbied it out. And now the housing prices in Munich have skyrocketed like a 236% over the past 10 years or something like that. So it's basically impossible to buy a new house there. You're always renting off these super landlords. They've like effectively got a monopoly going. And it reminds me of that situation. And it seems to be the only remedy for this is to get the government involved and be like, actually, like it's very important that people have housing. We should probably see to that.
Okie doke. Let's go, Scott. I knew that.
Yeah, well, since opening statements included already capitalism is bad because capitalism is bad, I guess I'll come in with the next meme and say, a Hayek quote, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists. Yeah, so I mean, so we're gonna have to get into a lot of stuff, right? The big part of this story is really not actually in the question, right? God, there's so much stuff that's going on here. The building systems that they're using, and they're pretending like, oh, the algorithm got away from us. Oh, it was a happy little accident because we got a little too aggressive in the market is complete bullshit. That's why they're being investigated by Labaton Soulker, which is, arbitration kind of like investigative firm that goes into kind of these arbitration systems before the Securities and Exchange Commission and stuff gets involved. They selling 14,000 houses and they're saying, oh, well, they're affecting the local market, even though the projections for housing sales at the end of the quarter is going to be 5.6 million, right? They make up less than a third of a percent completely. On top of that, they're selling to the companies. But the real story here is the fact that the left is kind of being co-opted by large corporations to do their work for them instead of paying attention to what's really going on, which is, people like Catherine Wood, which is, the ARC CEO, pumping and dumping these stocks. The fact that these corporations are working with IPOs and Blackrock, and we can get into the details of those things, actually reading the statements from Blackrock and stuff like that. But the corporations are loving the fact that the left is looking at this, blaming an algorithm, which is the thing that actually threatens the kind of large capitalist class, if you will, and wanting more government regulation, which is going to make them so fucking happy that the left are being useful idiots for them, instead of actually looking behind the curtain and seeing what's going on, which is, insider trading and market manipulation. And so we'll, like I said, as the debate opens up, we'll talk more about that. Of course, I'm pro a company like Zillow existing, right? I think once people actually understand how the housing market works, they'll understand that a company like Zillow, maybe, or Open Door, another similar company, needs to be there to get rid of the realtor kind of vampirism on the system, where realtors kind of steal money from home buyers because they think they're getting great deals because people that are selling homes are putting listing prices that are absurd and then coming way down on those listing prices. And it's the people that are the rich that are selling homes, and the realtors are laughing all the way to the bank while you think you got a good deal. And there's a lot of things we can discuss on that. But I'll leave that as my opening statement, that the real story is about BlackRock. The real story is about pump and dumping stocks. The real story is that we're likely seeing insider trading and a lot of evil corporatist shit. And instead, we're talking about how we need more government regulation in favor of large corporations.
100 points.
Yeah, I'm going to be with Fabian on this. I think this is a cautionary tale for investors.
Speak up, old man. Your volume is low.
I think this is a cautionary tale for investors that basically, you can't fuck with the market or the market fucks back. So if you make a shitload of toxic investments, then eventually you're going to have a toxic portfolio, and then it's going to screw you over. And if you're not as big as all of the banks in 2007, then nobody's going to give a shit when you kind of like destroy your own company and fuck with the market. As a result, I think this is probably good for the consumers temporarily, where they can take advantage of a lot of these properties coming back onto the market. And I'm not interested in having regulation being the main thing that we're going to turn to as a result of this issue. I would rather what we do instead is focus on new development. The truth is that suburban America is designed poorly. I love living in the suburbs. I love having a car, but there's a real opportunity for investment and development, and I don't see how like giving the government power to expropriate property and distribute it better solves a lot of the problems that we're looking at right now in this country. So I'm going to go fuck with my volume right now, and then looking forward to yelling at people in the general. It's going to be great.
Right. All right. Bam.
So I think what's going to separate us on this issue is people who looked at the question in principle and people who looked up the specifics of the data on the situation. In principle, if there were corporations that were like dramatically impacting the market prices of houses, that would be something to potentially look into. If you actually look at the specifics of the situation, Zillow had total ownership of around 7,000 homes. They just on their website alone, they have listed over 110 million properties. There's a very, very small market share, and even in I was looking for specific areas to see if they were buying these houses in predominant areas. When the only thing I could see towards that was one of the largest areas they were buying in was Tampa, Florida, and even in there they had around 100 homes, which in a city that has over 170,000 homes. So this actually doesn't have any, from what I've seen, doesn't have any dramatic impact on the housing market. And even if you had an issue with it in principle, I don't know an actual solution. Are you going to say that corporations aren't allowed to buy properties? Like, and if you could say they couldn't do it directly, they would just do the same thing through like some offshoot, like side company. And I don't know. I think that the solution, I think we just need to be making more housing instead of like, I don't think this has any impact in the issues, like the complaints that people are going to bring up, but I guess we'll see that in general.
Okay, let's go to Amanda.
Yeah, so iBuying's been happening for years. Zillow's exits not really indicating a problem of the industry as a whole. Now, whether iBuyers that industry ends up being a good option for homeowners or is overall harmful seems to be how well we can regulate this industry. Currently, iBuyers are often selling directly to institutional investors like private equity firms, which these firms are more likely to pursue evictions and smaller landlords, and some practice like predatory serial eviction filing, which obviously fosters housing insecurity. Personally, I'm just disgusted by the predatory behavior capitalism incentivizes, and I fear that these large corporate buyers will continue to push already sky-high income prices even higher, and that the wealth gap is going to keep getting bigger. I want to see stronger, better regulations on the housing market, and also remove the Medicaid state recovery program.
Thank you. Revolt.
I, for one, am happy to see that capitalism finally caught its own tail. Like, reminds me of my dogs chasing themselves in a circle. And I think it's beautiful that this is going to cost them a shitload of money because they were doing something that's pretty reprehensible and pretty stupid. Obviously, like the housing market is something that I disagree with everybody's take on this pretty much, because I think that there's probably some elements of it that necessarily benefit from being in an open market, and there's other elements of it that would benefit from being public supply. I think that we need to decommodify the low end of housing and make a baseline where everybody has access to housing. I think that would take some of the price pressure off of what's left of the private housing market, and that would solve a lot of issues here. But yeah, no, I think that it's real good that Zillow let some young kids run this bot and let it go to town and fuck themselves out of $1 billion or whatever. I think it's great, and every company should try the same thing soon.
Thank you. Next, Spectre.
Yeah, so obviously part of the question, do you think this was a disaster? It was, for multiple reasons: the effect on the housing market, the people that had to get laid off, the amount of money that the company lost. It was not good. But what we can blame that on, I don't think, is so much the economic system, or even the digitized decision making that it says in the question that capitalism is reliant on now, but rather the way that they were actually using the technology. Because what you have with standard business practices with using AI for any kind of monetary decisions in business today is that you want them to basically be having the AI do the complicated parts the AI is better at, which is taking a 7D scatter plot of data and then giving you 3 of the best options out of there. Now, somebody can do that with their eyes by hand, but it's going to take them a very, very long time to parse those numbers out and do the math. So usually what you want is the AI to just kind of structure the data in such a way that it's easier to read for the individual, and that's what the person who was supposed to be watching this and basically picking from the 3 decisions that it spits out does. And apparently they just didn't get someone who knew what they were doing well enough, or they didn't have the right things that they were accounting for in the algorithms. Maybe you want to see if there's a disparate opinion between the experts to measure for volatility or something. I'm not sure what they could have done better there, but it seems to me that even if this was a worker co-op ran business, that they would have still engaged in the same race to the bottom. When the housing prices market started falling in value. And it seems to me that even state-run institutions, when things start to go bad as far as losing resources, losing food, still engage in this same race to the bottom. So I'm not sure if we can blame it on capitalism as much as just like the AI was being used incorrectly, though obviously the market-based system, whatever you want to call it, did exacerbate the issue quite a bit.
UB.
I think I kind of agree with Fabian, sort of halfway, and that I think the most interesting question wasn't asked. So if we want to go through the topic questions, right? Do I think that it was inevitable? No, it's probably not inevitable. Now the company will probably figure it out eventually. It's currently figuring it out right now. We're going to see this happening again and again and again. And I don't think this is like any inherent fault of capitalism. The spooky capitalism. But the interesting thing is whether we should be okay with large corporations buying up thousands of properties and either flipping them or turning them to rental properties, right? Which is probably what's going to happen to a lot of these houses. If they're being sold to some other corporation, that corporation is going to turn them to single family rental properties. Is that a problem? If you have a dozen massive corporations in this country buying up tens of thousands of properties and then turning them to rental properties, making it much harder for people to actually own their own home in this country. Is that something which should be concerned about? And if it is, how do we stop it? Like, what kind of steps could we take to stop something like that? I think that's a more interesting part of this story here that I'd really like to get into.
Open to the panel.
I think the issue is we have
mention that some of the, just go off of Doobie, some of those problems that he was talking about, that it's kind of what I was talking about with the housing insecurity and how they excess late fees and attorney fees and other cost on those. I had kind of the same thought on how to regulate that between the iBuyers and the investors, and I don't really know if we can just shut off some of the market to certain people or how to do that.
Thank you. We'll go to Bam and then Scott.
Yeah, I think the reality is we're holding previous generations values and rules to the our modern society standards. The reality is this is happening for the most part because this is what we as a society want. We're not a buyer society. People don't generally want to be homeowners. People are getting and not ever people want to own homes eventually, but people aren't turning 23 and wanting to buy houses. They people usually buy houses whenever they're married or established families, and we can see from data that's happening later on in life. That's happening into those things. Or you think
because
people
they can't afford to?
They can't afford housing.
Not that they don't want to.
No,
for 40 years. For 40 years, a house costs
can't afford it.
2 years' salary.
You're not addressing what I'm talking about. Single people don't want a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom house.
You don't need a 3-bedroom.
$100,000.
Dude, my little brother's only 24 and he just bought a house. He's totally fucking single. You want to know why? Because he doesn't want to pay rent for the rest of his fucking life. Because he wants to actually have his money go into something that gives him money back with an appreciation value. It's a good economic decision. Everybody wants it.
And maybe he lives somewhere that he knows he wants to stay for the rest of his life. But that's not
you can sell the house and move later. It always goes up. The government protects the value of the housing market. Never mind.
That is literally, I'm about to say, the average person isn't willing to take on these level of responsibility. It's a great idea to say everybody would just have a home today. Even if it was for free and the government offered to just give everybody out a house and say that now you're responsible for all these fees that come with it, and no one's going to take care of the lawn. No, if the toilet goes out, you can't call the manager. It's something. All of those costs fall to you. The average kid coming out of college doesn't want that level of responsibility. So we have to stop pretending that everybody wants.
That's because they've got $300,000 worth of college debt. And they can't afford a house. That's the point.
It's not that they don't want responsibility; it's that they literally can't get it.
Yeah,
exactly.
They cannot take that responsibility.
It's so fake.
But why wouldn't you want to own a house versus paying rent? When you pay rent, you're paying the exact same amount or more, usually more because the mortgage on the same house would cost, right? And you get nothing except burnt checks when you're done instead of fucking equity. It's insane to not want to own a house. If you're gonna live in a house.
And I have one question. When your toilet breaks, does your landlord actually come out there and unclog it himself, or does he pay somebody? Because you know where he's getting that money, right?
Actually, I was about to say I do own a home, but that's not. But I was about to say,
yeah.
but and it was like literally an extremely tough decision to make for that reason. It was something that I didn't want to do. The only reason I actually own this is because I ended up getting like a really good deal, and I live in the South. I was about to say, but I would never buy like live in a major city and pay $400,000, even if like that's it. It's things. Renting is a good thing.
Yeah,
renting is not a bad thing. Like that, everyone
to,
doesn't need to own a home.
I used to rent a terrible thing. I literally used to rent across the street, right? And when I was renting a house and getting like no equity, it cost me $400 a month more than I'm currently paying for a mortgage and the tax, like the property tax and everything, like all included. So it's like I'm saving $400 a month. It's like $5,000 a year, and I own the fucking thing. And in the last 3.5 years, it's gone up like 240% in value. Like. It would be insane. Like, renting a house is the dumbest thing you can do. Like,
if you can afford a mortgage in a big city, people move there. You should probably buy it. It's just going to get gentrified, and the housing values will increase.
Let's go to Scott.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I just want to like correct a lot of things that have been said because
I love this part.
Just to like kind of fix some of the economic questions. Number one, the main reason that this is occurring, right, obviously is first and foremost because Zillow got too aggressive, right? It's not the algorithm's fault. That's just a silly take, right? But they got too aggressive and they took a risk. Well, why did they take a risk? Because they're a corporation and not a company, right? Because they're an LLC, because the individuals making those decisions don't actually have any real risk because they don't own any of the portion of the company. This is why corporation is a fucked up system created by the state so that wealthy people could engage in risky behavior and do whatever the fuck they want without actually inheriting any of that risk. But beyond that, why did the housing market change based off of their projections? The housing market changed based off of their projections because wealthy institutions and hedge funds and people started buying up a bunch of houses so that they could shore their assets into passive income, right? Because they see the writing on the wall of some of the economic situations that are going to be coming in the next few years, right? And they wanted to make sure that their assets were safe, right? Housing is a great commodity to shelter your assets, right? That's what they did. Well, see, the thing is the wealthy kind of already bought up all this shit. And then when inflation started kicking in and unemployment didn't improve by the metrics that they thought it would, the housing market dried up, right? And so what happened was Zillow didn't have anybody to sell these homes to. It's not this like cultural thing like that. I mean, like that is part of it. I'll give you that, Bam, right? But that's a very small part of it compared to looking at, quarter to quarter projections, which is what they're doing, right? There's a reason why in quarter 2, they upped it a little bit. And in quarter 3, they bought a ton, right? So that's part of the situation that I just wanted to say. Number 2, people talking about some of these corporations and these institutions, just to quote Zillow, right? They said that their strategy was, quote, selling to institutional investors as part of the company's broader strategy, right? That's why that's why they're so expensive, right? Because they don't want to sell to individual buyers right now. They're trying to offload a ton of properties. So they're going to companies like Blackrock, right? Blackrock's spokesperson said, quote, this information appears to be based solely on rumors circulating on social media, which is corporate speak for we're totally fucking doing that. Right now, so what you need to understand, right, is that these companies have a fiduciary responsibility that is granted them by the state. The state says that you have to shelter your assets in passive income, especially when the market is volatile, especially once you realize that public sector unions and pension funds are invested in these hedge fund companies, right? So they can't just do the types of investments that they might want to do. It is actually laws and regulations that cause large corporations to invest in passive income streams so that they can be protected when the stock market takes a dip, because it's actually illegal. They can actually be sued and they can get in a lot of trouble from the SEC if all of their money is in risky investments. This is why they're in real estate. It's because of laws and regulations. So when you're sitting here going, this is capitalism's fault and we need more regulation, it's the fucking regulations that caused this problem to begin with.
No, it's not.
You gotta
the lack of enforcement regulations. Like, and you just said a whole lot of stuff that like is not true, nor is that what happened in his situation.
Well, then make an argument.
I do want to explore this. So, like, what specifically?
By the way, hold on, though. BlackRock actually buys their own properties and like does this as well. So, yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't say that they didn't, so that's not an argument against me. That's just you trying to get some type of clout by
you
saying
literally
I'm wrong,
just
not making
said
an
that.
argument.
This is corporate costs.
Make an argument.
Like that was you
Okay.
just made up some shit and
I just-
acted like it was fact. It was really weird.
I just want to make sure that I'm
Okay, so you have no argument, Roger.
Your argument. So what do you think government regulation is doing to help companies like BlackRock, and what do you think it was doing to like harm companies like Zillow? Because I figured that it would kind of just like treat them indiscriminately.
What is government regulation doing to help BlackRock? Well, BlackRock's helping write the fucking legislation. Let's be honest, right?
You think
We have
that
people
Zillow
like
doesn't
Paul
write
Pelosi
legislation?
working with these individuals, like they're all fucking buddies, right? They're all working together. And anybody, and I mean, if you want like a bunch of sources of like large hedge funds being protected by the United States government, like that's a deep, deep, deep rabbit hole, right? Like I don't necessarily think that that's the conversation to have right at this moment because it gets a little far away from the topic. But in terms of what are they doing to help Zillow? I mean, I'd have to do more research into what they're doing to help
Well,
Zillow.
no.
but
Why
that's not an argument that I'm
was
making.
Zillow allowed to like fail? Because it's also just a very like rich private company, right?
What do you mean allowed to fail, right? Like, what do you mean by that?
It basically, like, they had to lay off like 2,000.
Yeah, it's like 25% of their company.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, they lost like I think it was $5 million. They were selling houses at like $30,000 below what they bought it. Right?
Mhm.
They were way too aggressive in their buying because they thought that the market was on the uptick. They didn't see the volatility there. So what I'm asking is, how does like regulation, in your opinion, cause this thing where these large companies can come in and just buy up these houses indiscriminately?
Right, so I'm talking about the investment firms when I'm saying that. I'm not talking about Zillow here.
Okay,
Right, I'm
but
talking about
BlackRock.
companies like BlackRock and then shifting their properties over to Blackstone and pretending like it's a different fucking company, right? Like I'm not talking about Zillow itself here, right? In terms of Zillow buying houses, they had like 14,000 houses. Like it's such a drop in the bucket of the market.
But how does the
Like,
regulation help BlackRock? What's it doing to help them is what I'm wondering.
What I'm saying, I'm not saying it's helping them. What I'm saying is the
So then the
fiduciary
problem isn't
responsibility
regulation.
I'm saying the problem of fiduciary responsibility and the fact that they have pension funds invested in them requires them to invest in passive income streams, right? They can't
but what would they be investing in otherwise? That kind of like you're begging a question here. Like, what would they invest in if they weren't investing in more secure investments?
If I have
they could invest
because you're presenting like corporations like they're making solid investments because it's a legal requirement in order to make sure they have some level of market stability. Okay, so we should regulate them less so they make more?
No. No, I'm not making it. I'm not making a value judgment on what they're doing and what they're buying. What I'm making is saying that when people saying that it's a bad idea that they're buying these houses, I'm saying, well, yeah, but the state is kind of causing them to do that to a certain extent.
No, but
right?
okay, but why are you making that assumption when people love real estate for all of the reasons that you mentioned, regardless of whether or not there's a state?
And I just want to know why, like, how, like, which regulations in particular are causing this benefit to them, in your opinion?
Oh my God, dude, you would have
He's not saying it's a benefit. He's saying that they're required to have a certain amount of passive.
I know. He's arguing
the market
for
does crash, so you have.
I know.
But here's the thing. Like companies like BlackRock, they're not buying houses because they have to like do it to be able to look good.
No, they're buying houses because the government has
They're
proven
buying houses
they won't
because
allow
I
the
haven't
mortgage
even
market to
owned
go
you.
down. So they're literally letting themselves a fucking the ability to write a fucking open-ended check if the market crashes. Like that's what they're doing. They're hedging their bets because they know that the federal government is going to back the banks on these mortgages always, right? And then they're underwriting the mortgages, and then they're making their own CDOs and they're selling them off market and doing like derivatives trades with them, just like they were in 2008. And it's fucking completely egregious. I agree with that. However, like, don't understand how you're arguing that it's a good thing that they'd be allowed to do this, and we need less regulation stopping them from doing it.
I don't think
I didn't argue that it's a
anything
good
related.
thing that they're doing what you're saying. I didn't make that. That's almost the exact argument that I made.
Okay, but
hold on. Let me finish my point because I got cut off. Just let me finish my point because I got cut off here. Because the reason they're not buying houses, and this is absurd that you think this, is not because they're trying to protect themselves from government regulation. If the economy crashes, we were safe, we bought real estate. No, it's because if I have the amount of infinite money that BlackRock has, I can go into a neighborhood, buy every house in there, turn it into like a fucking, like a chopped up like 3 unit like apartment almost. Like do whatever I want, drive up the value of housing, and then charge whatever rent that I want for like ever, pretty much.
That's not how that works. That's not how that doesn't happen. That literally doesn't.
So companies like BlackRock has literally done this, dude.
BlackRock literally hasn't. It's a myth. It's a myth. They don't do that. What they do is they purchase entire neighborhoods, right? from
That's what I just said.
No, that's not what
Yeah.
you said. What they do is
They don't
what they
control
do is
nearly enough to
Oh
have a
my
market.
god.
The point
no,
is, they don't have nearly
unfortunately,
enough to
no.
control the market.
You're not. No, that's not what they do. What happens is subcontractors, right, and companies will build a neighborhood, and then the neighborhood is designed to be sold to companies like Blackrock. What you're describing is them going into a neighborhood, right? I mean, it's an incredibly small portion of the market share, right? That occurs, but regardless, it does exist, right? And it does have pressures, right? So it is something worthy of talking about, but it is a small portion of the market. And what they do is they will package them, right? An entire neighborhood and then sell it to them. Because what happens if like a large hedge fund company, right, comes in and buys individual houses? Number one, it's a waste of their time and resources. But number two, other individuals in the neighborhood, they know they can tell when houses are being bought, right? Like they might sell their house, and when they sell their house and they understand that this large hedge fund is paying a premium or a discount, whatever they're paying, right? They know that they want control of this neighborhood or they want control of this block, right? And they think maybe they're doing it for a development, right? Maybe they're going to crush everything and build a shopping mall here or something like that, right? So what ends up happening is those people will jack up the asking price, especially if they're the last few holdouts in a neighborhood, right? So companies like that don't do that. Like, it's just not a practice that they do because it's just bad business for them. What they do instead is they buy prepackaged neighborhoods, right? Which is a small portion of their income, right? And then they do like the 2008, 2009 kind of financial situation. They buy them without even buying the homes themselves or managing them, right? Like they just wrap them up into securities and then, profit that way. They don't actually even need to own the property in order to just like kind of buy them from the bank and then let another management company do what it's doing.
I just
Right.
want to
They
point
want
out.
people-
I just want to point out that the iBuyers aren't beholden to the same regulations as institutional lenders have been since the
Right.
financial crash of 2008. So
Yes, that's exactly true.
They
We'd like
also
to- Go ahead.
they bought 15% of like the houses that were put on the market in 2020, right? So that's a huge portion of the share. The cost of housing, like since the pandemic started,
Where's
has gone
that?
up
Can you
28%.
share that?
Who
Can you share
is
that
it?
where they bought
Yeah,
15%
yeah.
of all of housing?
Do you mean
Yeah.
corporations in general? I've read that like some 15% of homes are owned by
Sorry.
corporations,
Sorry,
but like
corporate investors. Well, hold on, I was just gonna. So corporate investors bought 15% of U.S. homes for sale. But then in addition to that, there was a corporate investor in Atlanta, and I can't find an example of BlackRock doing this, but now I've got to find this part again. They bought 90% of the homes that were like for sale in Atlanta in the year. Yeah.
If you're having trouble finding it, might be Blackstone.
I'm just
People get them confused often.
It
but
might
he's
be
being-
Zillow, and it might have been the fighting
It's
algorithm.
no, it's a company called Invitation Homes that was spun off of Blackstone. So it's a company that basically went off just the same way that Blackstone went off from like the fucking other company. Like, I don't know, dude. I don't know what you want. Like, it's good of an example what you're going to get.
But
This is a
15% does
this
not
is a
the
really
market
broad.
make.
I'm about to say 15%. No, I'm saying even at 15% is like a really, like saying corporate is like a really broad term because like most people who buying houses for the purposes of renting aren't going to buy them under their individual liability. They're going to either come under an LLC or or a corporate. So just saying that 15% of corporate like are owned by corporations doesn't mean that we're talking about mega billionaire super corporations.
Yes.
They just,
Yeah,
like,
I just want to ask Fabian one question. I'll shut the fuck up. All right, like. So if we concede that like one company bought 90% of the housing in like Atlanta in 1 year, it's probably possible for one company to buy a neighborhood and just like sit on it or at least drive up the price of housing as a result. Like,
I mean,
I
obviously
think that's
anything
more
is
than
possible, right? I'm just saying it's not something that's typical because it's a bad business strategy. It's just stupid. I mean, granted, they're getting money from the government to do this, right? And they're also going to do things like they love to buy rent controlled situations because they have the capital to wait out until rent control fixes itself, right? Which is, another example of like the state intervening and fucking up the housing market. But I mean, gotta love rent control, but what I'm saying is like it's not a profitable business venture to do them. Is it possible? Sure. Does it make any sense? No. Has it happened before? Maybe. I'd like to see your example and like maybe kind of like look into it because I'm not aware of that, and I could be wrong in that instance. But even still, like it just doesn't make sense from an economic perspective for a company to do that.
Yeah,
also don't
holding on to
even.
property is extremely expensive. So yeah, the whole thing
Yeah,
is
well, that's
to
a
sell
that's a
it. Yeah,
stupid
it's to
straw
sell
man.
it.
You
So
get,
Yeah,
you
make
get,
it
you
rewind.
get,
hold on.
you get, no, you get
Oh,
cut, you get cuts on your property taxes when you let a property sit empty as a renter in some municipalities, like especially Los Angeles. So it just depends.
Amanda, you wanted to say, hold on, Amanda, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just lost the thought. Something that is bouncing off something that Spectre. Oh yeah, Spectre was saying how like they, so when we talk about they only own like these iBuyers 1% or up to 5% of the market, housing market, we're looking at the overall market and not specific locations and towns and the communities that these have affected because they're isolating these to certain areas. So yeah, sure, it's 1%, but it's a huge percent in certain areas. So they do affect the market, the housing market, and
Absolutely.
Even when that didn't even seem true when I looked at their data. Like I said, the largest, when they said one of the largest areas they bought in was Tampa, Florida, and like that was like one of their biggest shares of.
I was reading on Phoenix, so you could look that up.
I was about to say, but it was talking about 100 houses out of a market of 178,000 houses. Like that. That's
a market of 178,000 houses that are up for sale.
Yes, and they were talking about they bought 100 of them. They owned 100 of them. Sorry, which didn't seem like that's not enough to dramatically shift the market.
The market sells anywhere between like 5 to 11 million, right? Like I think it like peaked at like 13 million, like right before the collapse. Obviously that's an issue, but yeah. So just keep that number in mind that the projected end is 5.6 million.
The other thing I wanted to say is like I heard a lot of assumptions that like Zillow's failure was due to like being too aggressive. Everything I've seen on it, and again, I don't know their algorithm, but it seemed to say that like the algorithm for over the last year like couldn't properly account for COVID. Like they know COVID's a thing, so they have to they made adjustments to the algorithm, but those adjustments are still going to be man-made. Like they're based on some like average projection, and that projection just happened to be off on like what the housing market was going to be due to COVID because we're in like a really volatile, uncontrollable like time. I don't think it's necessarily a fault of the algorithm itself or the company itself. It seems like we're just in an unpredictable place.
They got really aggressive in Q3, and that's really the issue, right? Like they definitely made the moves more aggressive, and this didn't happen to other iBuilding. iBuilding. Now I'm forgetting the word. iBuyer. Sorry, I was like, that's not right. Yeah, so this didn't happen to like Open Door or other companies because they were more conservative with their estimates.
No,
I mean, yeah, you would be more conservative.
No, they had a human element, which Zillow was completely lacking. And so like the algorithm that they used. Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish. Amanda.
The algorithm that they used was underpricing home, or when they were making offers, it was lowballing it, so they weren't able to get a lot of the houses. So then they upped it and were overly pricing. Well, sorry, I'm using awful terminology here, but I think you get my point. And so once that happened, they didn't have the human element that all the other iBuyers have.
They had teams of data engineers, and they had tons of teams working on this, right? Like they could have slowed down the algorithm until because they increased their hiring by 45%. And it wasn't enough, right? So it's not the algorithm's fault that the company
lack of people
but it's the lack of people is because they tweaked the algorithm to be more aggressive than the staff they had to manage it, right? Like again, like it's not the algorithm's fault that they tweaked the algorithm to be more aggressive and couldn't hire enough people. Like I guess I'm missing your point. Like what?
How is it the algorithm? I just want to clarify the algorithm's fault. Like
I'm not saying it's the algorithm's fault. That seems to be
it's not. It's literally. Can I please explain how this works? So like this is the part that I actually did research on, not the economic side of things. So I'll just clarify here. Like this is not an algorithm making the final decision on what does the algorithm's in charge of like basically parsing the data and spitting out a couple of different options. It's reduced the amount of work that the humans have.
So you're breaking up there, buddy. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Hey, Spectre, what region of the U.S. you're in?
Texas.
Okay, that's the same. Anyway, but anyway, let's. I'm gonna change the region here. 1 second. Okay, give it a try again, buddy. signed
for me.
Go ahead, Spectre. Talk.
You're still roboting for me. Am I coming through clear now?
Yeah,
that's better.
yeah,
That's
you're
a lot
coming
better.
a bit clearer. Go ahead.
All right. I'll try and fix it if I get through this. So there's a difference between data-driven decision making and algorithm, or AI is what they call it, decision making, right? So with Zillow, they were actually doing what's called data-driven decision making. They have an AI basically go in and compound like complicated data into like I said, like a 7-dimensional scatter plot that needs to be like put into like some lines that you can then make 3 decisions as far as like what you do from, and it's accounting for like 7 different variables.
You should
Market indicators.
you should go fix that now and then come back. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say, because it seems that the only reason I said that was because I know that COVID in particular shifted the cost of housing, like was shooting it to the moon, which had like Zillow made a financial decision to pay like 10 to 15% over like people's asking price, like standard. They made that pretty much the standard, and they were doing that like time over time because the assumption is that we're like the market was going to continue going up, which they just didn't time it right.
But they didn't account for the fact that there was a bunch of unused supply sitting in the market already, right? There was a bunch of homes that people weren't selling because they wanted to get more money for them, but they weren't using. You know what I mean? So once they found out that they were going up 15% over the value, everybody jumped in the market and started the bidding at 15% higher, and they ended up like the algorithm ended up bidding up their cost like 20 or 30% higher than it needed to be. That's point one. Point two, like the thing that like people miss about like this BlackRock buying up all these houses is like they don't give a shit about the houses at all. Like the houses are a good asset. It's going to stay around. It's like pretty much good as gold nowadays. They can collect rent on it and they'll get some cash flow in the meantime. But like the big thing is that like they know that the federal government is not going to allow mortgages to fail, right? So no matter what happens, they've got a backstop. So they've got all this upside potential with no downside potential. And then the secondary point to that is that what they're doing is they're taking the mortgages for all these houses, right? They're bundling them together into fucking shady derivatives with a bunch of like, tiered stanchions in them, just like they had last time, so that some people will get paid out, some people won't, getting them rated by the same bond rating agencies that rated them AAA. But because now they're BlackRock and not an actual bank, they can sell them and like they can trade the market with it.
Isn't that Scott's point though?
We're kind of fighting over. Aren't we kind of fighting over the descriptive? Can we get to the prescriptive? Because basically,
yeah, the prescriptive. I mean, like the prescriptive is a lot easier in my opinion. Like I think the prescriptive is that you make you get rid of banks that have that much power, right? And like don't let them fucking exist in the first place.
Okay, but how? Because this is really the question: by trust busting or nationalizing? Because that's kind of like if you were saying like, trust busting, I'd be like, all right, yeah.
I think the state is always so good at this.
Trust. I mean, when has the state ever tried? For one thing, and for two things, like the trust busting doesn't work. Like, look how good AT&T is still doing, and look at fucking Standard Oil. Like you buy mobile, don't you? And like that didn't work either. So like,
well, the state actually created the monopoly of AT&T.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. They did, and then they tried to fix it, and then they allowed it to happen again.
And they fucked it up when they tried to fix it. Yeah.
Right.
So they fucked it up twice.
So, but they never did take it over and run it, right? They just kept paying them money to put fucking.
No, they nationalized it in the 30s and then took it over and run it and then gave it back to them in the 50s. And then that's why they had a monopoly was because the state created the monopoly when they nationalized it and they fucked it up, right? It's a pretty bad argument about how nationalizing is going to work. You just gave an example of how it didn't work.
Really good. It worked really, really good when we put telephone fucking cables in every single home in America, right? And like it was an entire industry for a long time. Like we flipped Allende out of Chile to support fucking their.
I mean, we can have a debate about AT&T and how they used IP law to purchase out competition and did all types of fucked up shit to maintain their monopolistic power with the help of the state.
Because they have an inelastic, it's an inelastic market that they're in, right? Like they're offering something that the demand doesn't change because of the price, right? So they have it doesn't work in a capitalist market. So it needs not be in one. Remove it from the market by nationalizing.
Well, I mean, it's the opposite. It's a very elastic market.
Okay, but according to housing right now, the conversation we're having, when you say nationalize, are you talking about housing or are you talking about banking? I'm
talking about banking. I'm talking about banking. Yeah, like housing. I think people should own their own homes, and I think that the banks should be run by we should have a national bank at least as a competitor to the private banks.
Well, here we go. Since we want competition in banking, and we're talking about AI and tech and capitalism, how about we just fucking move to synthetic commodity currencies and get away from the fucking Federal Reserve?
Because they're a joke, and like the Federal Reserve works good. Like that's
no,
why.
The Federal Reserve works good is your argument. All right, well, under that defension, I guess. I mean, because everything works great, right? Like the whole the capitalist economy.
Like when's the last time the dollar lost 12% of its value by lunchtime? Because Bitcoin happened like 3 weeks ago, and it could happen any day.
Bitcoin is barely a synthetic commodity currency. I mean, it's only a synthetic commodity.
This is the no true Scotsman.
No, a synthetic commodity currency.
Am I muted? What the fuck?
No. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay,
so Dogecoin.
God damn.
Dogecoin's not synthetic.
Okay, so the fucking the shit. The reason why this is such a frustrating conversation on the outside or whatever is because nationalization isn't going to happen in the United States for probably the next century, and everybody switching over to fucking Dogecoin isn't going to fucking happen in the next fucking millennia. So these fucking solutions are goddamn nonsense.
Wait a minute.
Hold up. I've been fucking murdering fucking things, which is digitally, which is giving me some level of emotional catharsis. But I've also been listening to you for fucking 15 minutes. So holy shit.
I know, but you had to wrong.
Please,
you just came out wrong.
Please,
you said that it couldn't possibly happen, and it just happened under Obama. Obama literally bailed out all the banks. Like, why didn't we just take ownership?
Connor.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, so the fucking point is we're talking about housing, and the truth is, as I mentioned in my opener, that there's plenty of things that we could do. Tiberius D, all of our mutual friend, we love him so much. He's such a sensitive white guy. He loves us back. So he was in a new development, I believe in Texas, where basically they had the hyper urban mixed zoning apartment complex right next to an open air mall with walkable fucking all that kind of shit. Like, why the fuck are we talking about I don't know, nationalizing or breaking up or anything when there's so many opportunities that are staring us right in the face? And on top of that, we're talking about regulating, a single company lost 2,000 employees and then hundreds or thousands of homes hit the fucking market and consumers were able to fucking capitalize on low prices. Where the fuck is the problem?
But they didn't, right? These houses were then immediately bought up, right? Like they liquidized them. They sold them on straight away to other companies.
They bought them 30% high, and they're selling them for a 30% discount, which means the market's right where it was. In the meantime, people don't have access to homes.
Hold on, that's not how housing works, right? Like housing listing prices is not the same thing as how houses are sold, right? It's important. It's an important distinction to talk about when having this discussion. Is that Zillow is listing them at absurd prices, right? Because they're hoping to sell them en masse to large corporations, right? But that doesn't mean that they won't take offers that are 2/3 the fucking price of that, right? They're simply doing it because it's easier for them to make bulk sales, right, than it is any other way. But that doesn't mean that that because the prices are higher, that's the actual price, right? A price is what you agree to purchase a thing at, right? It's not what someone sets and says, I want you to pay this, right? That's a listing. That's totally different than price.
Yes.
So we have to be specific.
Bid and ask, and we understand this, but it's got nothing to do with anything. We are, for the sake of this conversation.
Well, then it shouldn't be the crux of your argument if it's got nothing to do with anything.
No. We're talking about the net sale price, right, of the homes. That's what we're talking about.
But according to people who are actually engaged in housing, I guess housing markets, these houses aren't being sold for under market value. I was about to say, so because that people tried that. They said oh crap, I'm just gonna be able to make a lowball bid and they're gonna have to give it to me. No, all these houses they're not all sold. They're still being sold off, but they're not gonna be sold for less than market value. They're just not gonna make what they thought they were gonna make on them. That's the only reason they're taking losses.
Maybe they got lost on the margin. They got margin called, right? And now they have to pay a higher interest for a new set of mortgages, which screws their math up, right? That's where they're getting beat.
And the other thing is like I said before, is people are pumping and dumping the stock, right? That's another reason. They're not losing fucking money because they're holding on to because they don't have enough liquid assets. They're losing some money, right? But they still have the properties, right? The real issue is when you, like I said, Catherine Wood coming in and pumping in 300,000 shares of Zillow and bringing the price from $52 a share to fucking $67, $68 a share, and then dumping $1.2 million in shares, right? It's market manipulation from corporations that shouldn't fucking exist, right? We should just have companies where people are liable for the things that they own.
Because we got things like BlackRock where they can make these investments in these derivatives, right? And they can make these huge levered bets off market, right?
Just to be fair, Catherine Wood is ARK. That's not BlackRock.
Understood. But I'm saying, like, in general, this is exactly what we're talking about. The Dodd-Frank, right, in 2008 pushed all of these things like into the pink sheets, right, and like in the off markets now. So like the banks themselves can't make these gambles anymore, but the not banks like BlackRock, right, can. The Federal Reserve literally, like in the beginning of this year, February or March, literally asked BlackRock to buy treasury bonds because like they needed to get rid of them. You know what I mean? Like they have that much power that the Federal Reserve by name is asking them to make moves, right?
Of course. Yeah, that's part of the fucking problem.
Yes, it is part of the problem. But really, why they had to do that is because the fucking federal government wouldn't spend any goddamn money. Like if they just spent the money, like they would have done the same thing. But that's neither here nor there.
I agree with Connor. I'm going to radically disagree on that. But all right.
I mean, you can if you want to be wrong. But like the point though is that like the reason why these markets, right?
Right, just spend more money and that'll fix everything, Roger.
I mean, literally nobody has ever said that, and that's like a completely ignorant straw man that shows you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But like, regardless, the reason what we're talking
literally
about is the housing market
said,
right now.
If the government would have just spent the money, we'd have been fine.
Yes, in that one particular instance, the solution was spending money, and they refused to do that.
I wasn't making an overarching meta-narrative argument. I was simply responding.
No, you were saying that. You're saying just spend more money because that's your prescription for everything, and it's literally not. It's literally.
I
not
didn't say that. You added that last part.
Oh my God, who gives a fuck? Like, goddamn. So
this is why nobody likes ANCAPs. It's because
no. Fuck everybody.
I'm trying to make the
Revolt. Nobody cares. Least of all me. Like, for the love of God. Like,
calm down, CTV.
Now you go ahead and tell us why.
Please.
I'm wrong.
No, I
beg you. Go ahead.
I want to hear what your prescription
I was trying to tell you that. That's what you just
okay, I'm
listening.
Doing. So Fabian, please, for the love of God, let him make a description and don't just say the government is bad. I get it. The government's bad. You're an ANCAP. I fucking get it. Just fucking let him finish the fucking prescription.
I want to hear his Scott's prescription as well.
As long as you're a McPressed and not oppressed, it's okay. That's what
God.
The prescription to solve this problem, right, is to give people access to homes, like on a base level, right? We don't have to have like we can have luxury homes, we can have a luxury home market, and there's things can exist, but there should be at least a guaranteed home for everybody. And if you do that, it'll take a huge amount of market pressure off of like the lower end of like the existing homes, right? And like that alone should be enough to like make it no longer viable for these companies to come in and do this manipulation thing that they're doing, right? It's simple.
I completely agree with Revolt. I completely agree. That's an excellent point.
I think that like giving a more specific, like I agree with Revolt, but being more specific, because I think just saying that like, oh, we're gonna make some homes, we're gonna decommodify some homes and make some homes like national. I think that's like that sounds good in theory, but that's really hard to do because houses are so different. Like even on the same block, like how would you solve like that becomes a market issue because you're like some houses have basements, some houses have 4 bedrooms, like that would be a weird thing for the state to figure out on a person by person basis. But I think that a more realistic answer is something that we actually are getting rid of. Like I think we should make more projects. I think we should redo the project system with more which is like a base standard of housing. Like a lot of major metropolitan areas are getting rid of all of the projects for stadiums and other like things that are cool, but like don't. But I think that that should be the base level of housing. It should be housing, but like it should be standardized. Like I don't think that you can decommodify like the current housing market.
Okay, so Revolt, like the thing about it is, to me, the state guaranteeing everyone a house within the United States of America is a fucking ludicrous proposition that has no political viability within this century. Whereas what BAM said, where we redo the projects, I hear leftists saying get in the box, which scares the shit out of me because I don't want to be in a fucking 10,000 person leftist shanty town, which is what I hear when I hear let's redo the projects, okay? But what I think is a sexy, very sexy centrist solution is mixed zoning,
Oh God, not this again.
walkable fucking housing. Oh, shut, Doobie. All the stupid shit that has happened in the past 30 minutes. This is what you object to? Developing mixed zoning
I don't want
housing?
Judge Dredd houses, right, with the fucking mega city shit.
Oh my god.
No, they're not.
All right,
First of
I
all,
hate
they're
you.
called
I'm going back to shoot digital things in the face.
Soulker, right? Like they built like Stalingrad, right? Every city is a 5-block area within itself.
Wasn't it like you filed the malls and turned them
Dude,
into
you
houses?
picked the weirdest
like
time.
20-story fucking mega blocks.
Bring back
Dude,
brutalism.
you picked the weirdest time to object between like
Wait.
fucking the Dogecoin and fucking like super cities.
Well,
and
all that was so
mass
stupid.
banks.
There's no reason
That's-
to object to it. Okay.
Okay,
Like,
all right.
come
At
on.
least I'm
Let's
just
just be real.
stupid enough that I'm worthy of being objected to. That's good. All right. So, all right.
And to be clear, I actually agree with Revolt. I think. So I'd actually like to. Okay. I mean, a little bit. I mean, a little bit with fucking Judge Dredd housing, but yeah, I'd like to hear you lay it out again, please.
Okay.
Red housing.
Okay, literally. Okay, just go watch Tiberius. Check my timeline. Check Tiberius fucking adding me. I retweeted him a couple of times. There's a development in Texas. It's basically an apartment complex with enough a parking garage built right next to it. The center elevators go down into a mall, and then the mall has entertainment and fucking like a grocery store and all that kind of shit. That way, it's walkable. And the reason why I don't want Judge Dredd. I really love Dredd 2010, starring that the guy who is from The Boys. It's an excellent science fiction movie. Everybody should watch that shit. But at the same time, I don't want that. What I want is basically to combine the nostalgia of the 1990s American mall with sensible, high-density mixed zoning housing, which I think is something that you could sell developers and the government because there's money to be made. Whereas with Fabian Liberty, there's too much money to be made, and I think there's going to be all these like fucking problems that we dealt with in the 19th century that are just going to be revived because of his prescriptions. And with RevoltRise, I think that we're going to have all the problems that China currently has, because if you don't remember, they just had a fucking a 2007 level real estate crash literally a month ago that they're fucking covering up with toxic assets.
Yeah, but they're not. First of all, their economy's not coming down because they're not as stupid as we are, for one thing. And for two things, like there's nothing about what I said that couldn't look like the hell that you just described if you wanted to. Like, I'm not saying that the government gets involved in building the houses or anything. Like, we can leave private market where it belongs and does the things the best. But what we need to do is give people access to the mortgages that they need in order to go out and buy their homes. Like, that's easy stuff.
Okay,
that's what the government does best. Is it literally
just because
the government is only good at making money out of thin air.
What about
That's
the
only thing they
okay?
do well.
What about the VA housing loans for normies?
Sure.
Okay.
Just because the government is contracting private institutions to give out free homes doesn't make it somehow private.
No. I actually, but so we don't have.
I'm talking to Revolt, not to you, counterparts.
I get it, but I want to give you like the non-straw man version, okay? So the VA home loans.
I know about the VA home loans.
Right. So what is your like? I know you hate the state or whatever. But the the VA home loans have been a very successful thing for the military, which some people argue is a jobs program. And it's helped out a lot of people build middle income and middle class wealth. So what is your beef with VA home loans for normies?
Well, I mean, my beef is why are we taking money from people to give it and subsidize it to others?
Because you fucking otherwise you create robber baron kings like the 1920s.
You already have robber baron kings.
I know, because you don't have any taxation.
At least they get taxed fucking 30% these days. Holy shit.
Some of them
no,
do.
If you actually want to know what my policy prescription is, since everyone's assuming what it is, right? How about we get rid of rent control first and allow the housing market to open up in inner cities? And number two, how about we massively reduce the size of the police state and get rid of fucking war on drugs, get rid of housing development projects that are wasting taxpayer monies. And if we're gonna fucking tax people, I don't know, fix the fucking lead pipes and fucking water issues that are in these communities so that poor, low socioeconomic urban cities are not being bought up by large corporations that are using them for rent control so that they can weather the storm and make massive amounts of profits later. But instead, we can actually have businesses business and investment go into these places because they're not shitty places to live, because there's a cop on every street corner looking for a black dude between the ages of 16 to 25 to bust randomly, and because we're not wasting taxpayer money on fucking making the suburbs ever so slightly nicer, but instead actually fixing some of the infrastructure problems that we have in these communities, because that's part of the housing situation and part of the economic situation is how fucked some of these low socioeconomic status homes areas
you
are.
understand, if anybody was going to address that fucking word salad with 50 fucking concepts inside it, it would literally take
It's not 50 fucking concepts.
It would take a 20-hour dissertation.
No, you're trying to say Gish Gallop without me even saying Gish Gallop. I'm talking about ways that we can come together and realize that the state is causing issues in this market and get rid of those issues.
A lot of those things are good, but I don't see a lot of those things are good, but I don't see how, like, even if you do all of those things, I still don't know how that answers the question of what does it do for people who can't afford to buy houses.
Because what it does is it makes more people that can afford to buy houses.
Yeah, what about non-predatory rent-to-own through government?
What about non-predatory through government?
Hey, that's what I was about to say. That's what I was going to say, right? So, like, why don't you do what they do in the Netherlands, right? Where the state finances like 100% low interest fixed rate mortgages, right? And that way, people actually get to buy the fucking houses and they own the fucking house.
Yes, and they own the houses. They own the fucking houses.
Right?
They own
the
house.
private corporation, they still get their money, right? The market still fucking like gets its deal, and like private owners can still make houses and sell houses, right? But through this barrier of the state facilitating people owning houses, people actually get to own the fucking houses, right?
Yes,
people actually get houses.
It's the number
you just
one
keep saying
way
own the
wealth,
houses, right?
Wealth,
like,
listen, wealth distribution intergenerationally is done via houses, right? Like that's what we want. That's how you fix so many of the systemic problems in our country, right? Is by making wealth and making it easy to transfer from one generation to the next and allowing people to accumulate it, right? If you're going to keep this stupid system, which I disagree with on every level, capitalism needs that in order to work. Like so if you want your capitalism, your precious capitalism, you should really like think about this and think about giving more money to more people so that they can become more efficient consumers, right? And they can buy
exactly what my policy
people owning houses is good.
Right.
What you said, Revolt, is why I said that I wanted to take away, oh my goodness, I can't, the law that was signed by Bill Clinton in 1993, the state recovery program. What had happened was pretty much, so Medicaid is like a loan pretty much. And so if you are on Medicaid, typically the state ends up taking your house to pay back those healthcare costs.
I mean, I'm not against rent to own being a concept. I wish that was actually like more normalized or other thing. The only reason that it's not is usually done on like a private level and not a like a larger level than that is because it's hard to like usually people who go into rent to own situations are people who don't have aren't financially can't financially prove to like get a loan to buy a house. So like I'm not against that in concept, but I just wanted to address Connor's point earlier against me. I'm not talking about getting in the box. If anything, I'm probably talking about something more similar. Not exactly what you're talking about with like the super house, but I'm saying like when I put major investment into the projects, which is really just a way of building more housing, but having that housing being distributed on a needs-based people, because the housing market is one of the few things that seems to generally be successful for the middle class. I think like over 60% of the housing market is like individually owned by like middle class households, which we can't say for stocks, we can't say for like bonds. There's a lot of things that like the corporations and the super rich like have big stakes in, but housing doesn't seem to be one of them. But for like a lower income and working class people, like having the general projects be like a destigmatized form of housing, they were like, oh yeah, this is a place that I can always go live and I can afford to because it's going to be based off of whatever income I'm bringing in. Like I think that's a long-term thing, and it also like that level of housing being a thing allows people to save up to potentially own a home, and I think it lowers the cost of like the private market long-term. which is like two birds with one stone. And now you have no people homeless.
Can we also get rid of the estate tax since it disproportionately affects the poor?
Like nobody
estate
is
tax
on
is like
your
our
page,
one chance at ever stopping the runaway fucking oligarchy. Like honestly,
Yeah, well,
like,
it
this is how we got
disproportionately
here.
it hurts the poor and the middle
Then
class
change the
more than the
policy.
rich.
It doesn't help. That's not true. But like, and then change the policy.
No, it absolutely is. The
Okay,
most
so change the
affected
policy.
individuals
Change
are
the policy.
farmers.
Just raise the limit so
right?
that people don't have to fucking pay until they make
Like
$5
it's
million.
one of the big ways that the state makes sure that that poor farmers aren't able to grow.
It's not.
Right, but
it's
they
not
act-
farmers.
The state
It
is not
absolutely
trying to fuck
like
over
you can
poor
no,
farmers.
I can explain it, right? Like
I
it's
understand.
a literal
what you
fact.
think is
It's
gonna
a
prove.
I
literal
don't know
fact
what
that
I'm
farmers. It's a
Then
literal
why do
fact.
all these rich
it's a
people keep buying
literal
farms to
fact.
hide their assets?
It's a literal fact that
It's
what
a literal
far-
fact
it-
that they keep buying farmland
Shut
to
the fuck
hide
up
their
for
assets.
just a second. Because
I don't
you're-
want to
you're
because what you're
disagreeing.
saying is factually inaccurate and
Okay,
it's just
well,
dumb and a
okay,
waste of time.
okay, so
All right, go
it's
ahead, man.
me
Go ahead.
against
You're
a
wrong.
whole bunch of left-wing people, and
No.
fucking
It's you
two
against me and I'm
centrists.
right.
So,
So like,
just
that's-
give me a half.
Why should
fucking
why should we
second.
care about the family farmers, right? Why shouldn't we let corporations take
yeah,
over the
fuck them.
entire
They're
industry?
inefficient anyway. If there's one thing we learned from the
Right.
fucking Soviets, it's that fucking giving every fucking
Right, so-
like Dick and Sally a fucking farm is a bad
So
idea.
this is where the mask slips, right? Where he doesn't care about home ownership because he doesn't care
Yes,
about
I do.
ownership.
I care about
because
home
he's
ownership.
a fucking. No,
I
you
don't
don't.
think that, I don't think
You
that you should
don't.
own
You clearly
13
don't. You said
homes.
fuck
I
the
think
small
that everybody
farmers
should own one.
and fuck
I think
them
we got to work on
passing
that problem first.
intergenerational wealth.
And I
cares
think that
about it.
intergenerational wealth transfer, right? Like if it's
estate
being
tax is
obstructed
one
by
of
the
the
wealth,
biggest
by
ways
the
that
estate
fuck.
tax, like it shouldn't be. But we can set the limit to $5 million or something, like something
Yeah.
reasonable.
He
Right
cares
now,
about
Jeff
it.
Bezos.
Literally what
is
I'm talking about, but because I'm an ANCAP, you're just mad at me and won't let me finish my fucking
I
sentence.
literally,
We're literally
I asked you
the
first
same
thing. I
policy.
said, why don't we just raise it to $5 million? And you said, no, we got to get rid of it completely because that way, the people that have a bunch of money will never pay any taxes on it. Like that's.
I never
stupid
said
shit.
that. I never said that. I would get
Okay.
rid of it completely, personally, right?
Yes.
But I would totally be willing to compromise with people at setting it like $5 million, right? Because what happens is the poor and the middle class, right? Because you can't fucking get your fucking anarchist society tomorrow, right? Like you have to make compromise.
No, we know we're not. You're the one that's an ANCAP. Like I'm not an AN anything.
Okay, all right. Well, stop being triggered and just let me explain what's going on.
I'm not being triggered, man. I'm just saying you're wrong.
What happens
Like that's fine.
Intergenerational wealth, right? Is
Yeah.
that people get their homes passed on, right? They don't have enough money to pay the estate taxes, and then they're forced to sell those homes to individuals with larger amounts of capital, and they're not actually able to keep those homes. And it happens especially to
You've already agreed
farmers.
on the solution
And one
to
of the
this, man.
things that farmers do, right, is they sell off their property to their children piece by piece by piece, right? They'll do it over like 15 years to try and reduce the estate tax because it's not possible for them to, when they die, for their children to just not lose the farm unless they do it piece by piece and try and circumnavigate the system.
You've already
It's a
agreed on
problem.
the solution, though. So, like, it's
Yeah.
pointless continuing along this.
Yeah.
What's that?
And
You've
Sorry.
already agreed upon the solution,
Get-
right?
get-
Raise the
get
estate tax to $5
farmers
million, right?
more
Just that
money
You've agreed.
and
You've
set the
agreed.
limit higher. Simple.
Yeah, it's, like I don't know why you keep.
I
talking.
mean, I disagree with it, but I mean, like, again, I'll compromise on it.
Oh, there we go.
So at least there we go. We have another policy prescription that we can agree on in this asset.
There we
Yes. Now, like, let's talk about why people should pay fucking earnings tax. And once they make more than $50 million a year, like that's something we should probably talk about because like that's another way that you can solve this problem, right? Especially when you're talking wealth transfer and you're talking to stop people from making like frivolous investments into things that are like necessary commodities for a lot of people. Like you need a house, right? So we don't want people gambling on the housing market, right? Like one of the ways that you can stop big, powerful people from gaining enough fucking capital in order to do that in a malicious way and manipulate the market in their favor, right? Is to charge them based on how much money they make every year, not what they claim as income.
Yeah, but then that gets like super fucking toxic because then if somebody is like an investor or whatever and then they don't post any kind of profits that year, like a lot of R&D and a lot of investment is reliant on losing short term in order to gain long term. You eventually like this is why I don't God,
Right, but if you're losing short term, you won't pay taxes.
Hold on, real quick, because I swear to God, I've talked like 10% of this time. This is why I literally hate between being the two of you because it's like fucking FLS is like, hey, we don't need fucking anything. Like we can just do all our shit on our own. And you're like, hey, nationalize everything and tax everybody regardless of whether or not they fucking make a profit. Who gives a shit?
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I said.
Well, okay, but you just said charge
Earnings-
people. You just said tax people
accounts
based off
for
of how much they
losses.
earn, not based off of their. Sorry, say that again.
Earnings accounts for losses the same way, but there's a very specific definition that we apply to income, and that's what income taxes apply to. Everything else is capital gains tax, right? What I'm saying is that you extend the income tax bracket to cover capital gains too. Get rid of capital gains, but I'd also say make a caveat that we want poor and working class people to be able to save money and make investments in the stock market and take advantage of all these systems that everybody else has. So I would say, like, let's refine capital gains so that it is like between, you know, $250,000 and $1 million or something like that. And then, but like, you know, of income per year. Like,
Okay, so
if you do that with earnings, like Jeff Bezos, right, bought like all of his shares in Amazon at $0 a share. They're now worth $180 billion a share or whatever they're worth, right? Like, he will never have to pay taxes on that $180 billion in generated wealth. Like, how is that fair?
Okay, so hold on. So I just want to take it meta for just a second. The reason why I do these fucking panels is because, like, we come up with interesting thought experiments. We can poke holes in each other's ideas about why it's not going to work and all that kind of shit. But realistically, the reason why I talk about like what I think are pragmatic solutions is because I don't think a lot of these things, while they might solve for the externalities that you are principally concerned about, I don't see them as like being even capable of moving the Overton, maybe capable of moving the Overton window, but not really resulting in actual policy. So for instance, like when we're talking about like effective tax rate or capital gains or anything like that, part of the problems that we have, so for instance, like people talk about like General Electric or Jeff Bezos or fucking Tesla paying like 0% fucking income tax or whatever. Part of that fucking problem is because we have it like an effective tax rate where what you can do is you can discount your losses or discount like your business operations against your taxes, so you can make your burden effectively zero. So if you buy a fucking $10 million fucking plane and it's a business expense, you can use that to fucking like defer your fucking taxes or whatever. Yes. I think that like a way to do this, like the way you look for solutions is one in which everybody consistently wins, where you can still draw a line and be principled. So like if you were like RevoltRise, the fucking dictator of America for a day, I think if you proposed that in public, you would be assassinated the next day. I think the bankers would literally shoot you in the back of the head twice and claim it was a suicide. So hold on, but then like what I would say is if you had like an effective tax rate that was like 5% or 10%, where you're saying like, yeah, your tax rate is 20%, you can deduct a certain amount of your taxes for business expenses or losses, but then no matter what, you are paying 5 to 10%. Then you generate revenue that you previously weren't, you have more money for fucking social programs, and then like it's weird to get wrapped up in these fucking principled arguments, because the only way that you're going to be able to achieve these principled arguments is through violence, and that's kind of why I don't vibe with these prescriptions.
All of our taxation, especially taxation policy, is backed with the threat of violence. You don't pay your taxes, the government's going to come with the guns and they're going to put you in the jail.
The record,
right?
mine doesn't require violence.
Yes, because you will have a lot of violence, because you will have a completely collapsed society with no economy in like 3 weeks. Don't worry, like there will be a lot of violence.
I'm pretty sure the ANCAPs will do a better job of managing an economy than.
I mean, like yes, but they'll have to deal with me, and like I haven't.
Well, you said yes. Go. All right, I'll take that W.
As long as you guys have belt feds, man, because I got belt feds. I think I'm gonna come and take all your shit right away. It's the private police.
Okay, so it's like they finna kiss.
There we go. Mask slips off. He's a fucking
imperialist. The mask hasn't slipped. I never was wearing a mask. I was always going to shoot at you if we were going to an AMCAP society. There's no question about that. That's the fastest way to win an AMCAP.
Like, there you go. Complete.
The point though, in the real world, like over here, in reality.
That being said, another thing that we could is what about UBI, right? Like I know it's kind of a meme thing, but like how does the panel feel about like Andrew Yang's version of UBI, right?
Andrew Yang's version is the worst possible version that you could come up with.
That's gonna go in our we're already like far away from the topic.
Yeah, well, people were late as shit. Right?
Yeah, so
I didn't get to get
negative income tax bracket is like more popular, right?
Back to which is also completely stupid, because it does give you whatever. It doesn't actually generate cash. Like if we go back to the situation of talking about housing, right, and we get people into housing, and we get like the bottom portions of the market like decommodified. We're not nationalizing anything. We haven't nationalized the goddamn thing. Like all we've done is made like single payer home
decommodify
buying, right?
it.
Sure, we decommodified it by saying that like we're going to allow people the ability to not have to fucking struggle for a basic necessity.
Right. So how did you do that without nationalizing it?
I just want to know what.
So who owns that property?
The people do. So like that's the point. Is we're going to single payer like fucking mortgages. Think about it. Like
so how is that not nationalization of it if you're taxing people?
He doesn't care.
And then using state funds to purchase property and then redistributing that property, right?
Because the property, right, like is not going to be redistributed. The people are going to take the money and they're going to buy the property themselves. Like, right?
So what are you just going to like hand out like you're just going to hand out like $100,000 checks and say buy a house?
We probably wouldn't write checks to just make electronic transfers to their bank accounts, because that's the way the world works nowadays. But yeah,
that's what we're gonna do. I think nationalization of property. right? Because you just
Like,
hand the property over
like
afterwards.
Like nationalization of property would be if the nation owned all the property. Like that's the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying individual people, as citizens of the nation, get to own whatever property they
How are you
like, and
gonna
they
pay
can
for
put it wherever they want it. How are we going to pay for it? We're going to like the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are going to get together and they're going to like print Treasury bonds and then sell them, and the money's going to come in and they're going to fucking put it in the Treasury, and the Treasury is just going to fucking
Medicare and Social Security, right, are already in a situation by 2050 we're going to be $129 trillion.
Social Security and Medicare are
you're just going to increase that gargantuanly.
They're completely different things. Like if you don't understand how they're functionally not even remotely comparable, then like I don't know how to help you in this conversation. But like they're not even close to the same.
That's because you didn't listen to what I said.
One of them's funded, right, and the other one is an expense, and the way that
they're not funded.
All of its expenses. Yes, it literally is.
No, like, they're not funded.
Oh my gosh.
Like the numbers. Hold on,
before we get into this, y'all are going to talk about something irrelevant. What is the bottom portion of housing?
Like even the CBO admits we're going to be $129 trillion in debt. We're going to be almost 200% over GDP. So even by modern monetary theory, right, and Keynesian economics, you're way past GDP.
Japan's at 240%. They've got way less capacity.
Where are you getting this money from?
They literally printed out of thin air. That's how it works. It's how it's worked since 1975.
That doesn't fucking work when you're past GDP.
It doesn't work. It doesn't. Then how come we're the strongest economy in the world and everybody's buying dollars? Then
we're really going to just relitigate everything that Randall Ray ever wrote about, like inflation and
no. It's fucking like insanity to say that. Like no. Like the point is that like when you spend the money into the economy, right? Like when you give the people the checks to go buy their homes with, they're buying into the economy. You're increasing the GDP of the economy, and that money is not going to go nowhere. It's going to have velocity, right? And the bigger the velocity, the less inflationary pressure you see, and like. That's what makes the fucking world go around, is people being able to buy stuff.
That is more Keynesian than the fucking Federal Reserve.
It's actually post-Keynesian, so
post Keynesian,
Regardless of any of that bullshit, like the point is that like it's a closed system. So we spend the money into the system, and then the people get the money, right? Like either the landowners get it, or the builders get it, or the fucking, you know what I mean, or the real estate agents get it, or the movers get it, or the painters get it, like whatever. Like this is how an economy works.
You're gonna have rampant inflation.
You're not
gonna people are going to be protected from rampant inflation are the wealthy.
Can we stop? Oh my God! For fucking.
You're worried about rampant inflation and how
just keep talking to each other.
No! Holy shit!
I would talk to Connor about
You're
zoning
allowed
laws.
to raise your hand and be called on by the moderator. Like, calm the fuck down.
No, because are you kidding me? There's like fucking 9 other goddamn people here who haven't had a fucking word in edgewise because you two fucking A-words are fucking at each other's throats the entire time.
Sorry.
Just raise your hand. Chill.
Yeah, and by the way, I didn't mean
have a
asshole.
mod.
I was being ableist. So, okay.
Oh my God.
So, FLS, for the love of God, like, if you just waited for 30 fucking seconds, then RevoltRise could fucking explain this to you. Which basically, when it comes to inflationary fucking pressure, typically what's going on is if there's correlative fucking economic activity, then generally speaking, there's not as much as inflation as most people fucking think. So the reason why UBI won't work, but MMT kind of does work, is because as long as there's new spending that's correlated with like economic activity, then it doesn't break the logistics supply chains or the fucking money. And on top of that, you're so worried about American debt, you're not keeping it within context of all of the nations of the world that are all doing the same fucking thing right now. China is leveraged up to its eyeballs in debt. Japan's leveraged up to its eyeballs in debt. Every modern fucking society. Okay, yeah. So when all of us reach to some kind of fucking like the cards is gonna fucking, you know, collapse on itself or whatever, we trade fucking horses. You don't let the international globalist fucking economy crash. Whereas your fucking solution of going back to the gold standard and deleting the fucking debt of the United States.
It's not my solution.
It has about as much of a fucking chance of a snowball fucking existing outside my house right now in Central Florida.
But that's not even a straw man, because you never even heard my solution to that. You're just making up shit.
But you say that every fucking time, but your descriptions imply prescriptions. So either come with your fucking prescriptions or fucking don't. Go.
Don't just make up shit.
But
I already said my prescription. I said we need to move to a competition.
But your complaints are already addressed by a lot of like fucking theory and a lot of economic fucking thought that you dismiss out of hand despite not fucking studying it. So it's fucking weird to be so dismissive of other people while demanding fucking respect in your direction. You want that fucking respect, so I listen to you go on a fucking 10-minute rant about how everybody else is a fucking asshole? Then extend it to everybody else in the fucking room.
I just think that like
Calm down.
There's some level of
Topic's gonna
understanding
be
when
a good
people
one.
go into these conversations that like people are coming from different beliefs. So yes, someone is going to say something that you don't believe is true, but you have to let them finish that point because what they're describing under the framework of things that they believe and agree with. Like if you're an NCAP, you're not going to agree with RevoltRise's framework of MMT, but if he's explaining his position under that, then you have to just let him explain his position under that, like to get the point. But actually bringing it back to the point, like asking RevoltRise, what do you specifically mean? Like what is the bottom of housing? What is the low end of housing? I don't know what that means.
So, like, literally, I mean, if you want to break it down, whether it's quintiles or deciles, 10% or 5% or whatever the blocks are, like, take, like, basically, like, the bottom 2 or bottom 3 or 4 of them, depending on how you're doing it, something around 10 or 20% of the market, and make it, make those houses available for everybody. You know what I mean? Across the board. Now, whether you distribute the money... What's that?
I'm talking
about price wise, like basically figure out whatever that range is, right? And then make sure that everybody has access to that. And then there's enough supply of houses in that price range too, that you're going to have an adequate supply for that. When everybody turns 18 years old, they can go out and buy their house, right? And like if you do something like that, like rather than just like, I mean, everybody's like, oh, you're just going to print the money. And it's like, yeah, we're going to print the money and it's going to be a permanent economic stimulus because every year some people are going to buy these houses, right? And during the course of the year, there's going to be jobs building the houses and there's going to be fucking like, you know, money to be made on selling the lumber and all the other things that go into it. And like, and so it's going to be like a permanent jobs program for the country and taking care of like a huge set of other problems and like getting rid of some nasty secondary effects and implications that are associated with our current like system. The inflation thing, I want to hammer on that. Somebody said inflation. The housing market in Austin has gone up 240% and like in the last like 3.5 years. Like that's some sick inflation. Like if you need a house and it costs 2.5 times more than it did 3 years ago, but like nobody's ever worried about that. And what I'm proposing fixes that issue.
Or is there going to be like some stipulation or requirement that these houses are like for residential use?
I would want to say that, yeah, maybe we can make some laws to say that you can't rent them out or whatever, but I don't want to do that. I want people to own their own homes and like own it, like own it, treat it like you want to treat it or whatever. But like, you know, it's yours.
Sure, but I'm saying like if you're in California,
just let people know we have 90 seconds. You guys want to help out with the hype train? Just letting you know it's happening in chat. Keep going.
Yeah, I was about to say, but it just makes seem interesting if you're in California and the amount they like, if they're distributing this housing like this money based on, I assume, the community you live in, and in California they give you, I don't know, $340,000, and you decide, you know what, I'm gonna use this and buy 3 houses in Alabama and rent them out for, you know, $1,000 a piece and just use that. Like, do you not see how this could be like used to hurt out like some of the poorest people?
I mean, it could, but like I think that it's less likely. It's easier to regulate it, and it'd be easy to put like provisions in to stop that from happening now. But like if every year, like every 18-year-old kid is going to come into enough money to go buy their own home, right? And like we continue to supply a supply around the country of like these homes that are in that price range, then like how could they do that? Like how are they going to corner that market?
Yeah, because housing is extremely different.
Like I mentioned earlier, right? Like they do this in the Netherlands. Like this is already like a very similar practice going on in the Netherlands, where they like finance these things, and like it just doesn't seem to be the case that happens. I mean, I guess you could say like there'd be bigger problems when you inflate it, and like when it's applied to like more housing, more people, blah blah blah, bigger market, more complex issue. But like the evidence we have so far seems to support revolt. Like. Factually.
No place on earth is like America.
Lack of affordable housing and like not inability to move around for like workers is actually bad for the economy. And like Revolt said, when you're using the money for this, you're putting it somewhere that has a lot of fucking velocity. It's better than like letting Elon Musk get like $10 million grants from the government for like SpaceX because he butthurt that Bezos got one, right? So because that money just sits at the top and nobody seems to give a fuck about that. Hold on, like Revolt, how much money did Texas lose out of its fucking economy when we ended up
$2.5 billion in a month. And our unemployment rate went up when they cut off the UI insurance because people stopped spending money. But like, and beyond that, I'll give it right back to you. But you made a great point. Right now we've got this worker shortage that everybody's complaining about, right? And like the big concern is that employment, wages are going to go super high because we don't have enough workers. We have plenty of workers. The problem is we don't have them in the right areas, right? So we have a liquidity problem inside of the jobs market, and like so. Doing what I'm talking about, making increased access to cheap housing and making sure everybody has it, makes it also possible for people to move around the country a lot easier, right? And so like that, which has huge implications in terms of making the job market more efficient.
Yes, and it's not just that we don't have enough workers. We don't have enough like customers right now that are spending enough money to like keep these businesses like to want to stay open, and they're going out. And that's what taking away the fucking unemployment money did. So that was a really smart move. That being said, like Connor, you're right. Zoning is probably the most reasonable thing that we can be talking about right now. We need to have zoning laws that incentivize developers and speculators to build affordable housing instead of unaffordable housing. The single family zoning law in California that they just finally fucking got rid of, that was very racist in its origins in the first place. Like that's based. We are already seeing like property values apparently starting to drop. That's the first good thing that Gavin Newsom has done in regards to housing. And he did it after the recall, after not campaigning on it, which is really weird to me. But yeah, there's probably some like stuff that's going to be a lot more electorally viable than anything that we've talked about here with zoning that we could possibly look at. But yeah, I don't know. I just
what is the solution and what is viable?
Oh, okay,
There seem to be two different answers.
no, like sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, so fucking Spectre, like the thing is though, what I get frustrated with this conversation of fucking lefties though is like RevoltRise has like his prescription is so much more fucking extreme than anything that's going on in Europe. Like basically, in Europe, fucking like Austria and fucking Germany in particular or whatever, they have what do we call them? Projects that are nice in the city that have subsidized incomes and I think options to own. That way workers can live within the cities in which they work. I think that makes sense from an economic level, especially when you're talking about like a fucking a modern super city.
No, it's not
What they don't have. Okay, you tell me about it in a second because that's my understanding of it. But I do not think that any European nation has 0% fucking state subsidized loans to every swinging dick in the fucking country. I have never heard that as a fucking policy.
There's also it's saying that something worked in countries the size of downtown Denver, like, and saying that like it could be applicable.
I mean, it would work
in a country the
actually,
size of the United States.
It would actually work better here because we have more money and we have less debt relative to our GDP. It's like a credit card, dude. It's called debt to income ratio.
And it's way cheaper to build the houses here.
You're not America, my man. Like they,
but can I hear?
Money. It works.
But the reason I was making that point is from like you saying like the cost of owning a home. Like this varies dramatically depending on where you live. Like there's not one market for this. There's no.
Of course it does. And this is the other thing too about the loan situation is that like we can also elect to offer these loans and make them repayable based on your income level, right? Like you can say that everybody has to donate like 10% of your job, just like we're talking about doing for college loans, right? Like that's an option, right? And it still satisfy all of the things that I set as requirements, and and also make people more accountable for paying their mortgages back. But like beyond that point, like there's going to be areas of the country that are more expensive, and there's no getting around that. So we will necessarily have to like deal with that by maybe splitting it up into states, maybe setting the fucking quarters or whatever of the country into different zones handled by different offices. But like that stuff is simple, and to say that like this is a complicated project and it's way more extreme than anything else, like during 2008 and 14 times since then, major banks in this country got bailed out for every fucking mortgage that they wrote. Like literally every mortgage in the country, meaning every house in the country had its mortgage paid off by the federal government at some point. Like, and it was done with a fucking swipe of a pen. It literally took seconds to do. Like, I don't understand why this is what I'm saying is radical.
And again, like you said, like nothing so extreme.
Your prescription is more of the same problem. Right?
Let's get to let's Spoon. He hasn't had a chance to talk.
Like you said, like nothing so extreme is happening in Europe. Like I said, the example with the Netherlands giving 100% mortgages, that's happening. Like Germany, like last month voted to like expropriate 80% of the properties of private landlord conglomerates. Like yes, actually, they really are doing very extreme measures. They voted to expropriate 80% of a private landlord conglomerate because the inflation was so bad. Because
did they compensate the property owners?
Fuck them! They've been compensated for long enough.
The vote didn't actually pass.
Shut up.
Are you
the vote didn't actually pass, but the point is they are willing to take such extreme measures because, like I said, like right at the beginning of this conversation, it was in Berlin, right? The price of a house in Berlin has gone up 236% in the last 3 years, man. Like RevoltRise says, 2.5 times as much inflation. That's insane. You can never own a house in Berlin, and do you know who keeps getting richer? Private landlord conglomerate. They just keep it all coming in, keep it all raking it in. It's become such a problem. The government is actually having to get involved. They are taking extreme measures, like expropriating on a mass scale.
And they are getting their money, by the way, Connor. Don't worry, we're not just taking it from them, but they don't deserve the money. They got
Germany has free college for everybody, including you don't even have to be a citizen of the country. You can go there; they'll give you a visa and they'll give you a stipend to live.
That's a different conversation. That's a
no. But listen, and they make 600% ROI on it. By the way, like $6 for every dollar that they spend gets returned to them in taxes. So think about that for a second, and also think about the fact that like if you take this burden off of the bottom 10 or 20% of people in this country, you take the cost of their mortgage off of their burden, they can now buy more shit. They can buy more TVs, refrigerators, beer, you know what I mean? Go on RV trips, do whatever. Like that would be a huge boon to our economy.
Yeah.
So this entire conversation is so fucking annoying. Like,
we agree there.
You have so many unintended consequences that can occur from your actions. You're playing God with the economy and then using post-Keynesian economic theory to just say it'll all magically work. Let me explain to you how the economy is going to work every step of the way when we radically change property. When we radically spend money, right? In so many of these different areas. It's like we have this funny little analogy in Austrian economics called the snake problem, right? Because
Austrian economics is completely debunked.
Okay, well, right? So it's called the snake problem, right? A ton of countries have attempted to get rid of venomous snakes in before, right? It happens all the time. They have a bunch of venomous snakes and the government comes in and says, you know what we'll do? We'll pay people to kill these snakes and then they bring us the dead snakes and we'll give them some money and then we'll have a lot less dead snakes. And every time it happens, what occurs is there's actually a higher amount of snakes than when they started. Because people start breeding the snakes, people start finding ways around them, people start bringing in fake snakes, people start scamming the system, but mostly it's just snake breeders start bringing in the same snakes that they were paying, right? It's unintended consequences. When you talk about making radical shifts in the economy and then just assuming that spending massive amounts of money and then changing the way private property works as an institution that is kind of the foundation of a capitalist economy.
We're giving more people more access to private property. That's what we're doing. Think about that for a second. If it's the foundation of your country, you'd think that you would want that.
That's not at all how private property rights work, right? You don't just use the state to then give private property to people by stealing property from other people.
But you should if it's beneficial for society.
But it's not stealing.
Yeah, but you're just magically saying it'll fucking work.
I'm not just magically
God
saying
with the fucking economy.
I'm not playing God with the economy.
This is what they've been doing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Listen,
here's what's going to
for the last 45 years.
Since we're just making assumptions. Since we're just making assumptions.
We aren't making assumptions.
Shut up.
You're making assumptions. I'm not.
No, you're literally making assumptions. No, let me make this point. I waited for people to talk about this
stupid ass assumption. Go ahead.
I waited for everyone for like fucking ever to talk about how they wanted to expropriate fucking property.
Nobody wants to expropriate anything but you.
Okay, all right.
Expropriating our fucking time with your silly bullshit.
No more talking. Great, Spectre, you had something to say, and then we got to move on.
Yeah, I would love for Revolt to have this conversation with somebody who's actually like read Randall Ray's shit and can provide like salient criticisms as to like where he's wrong here. But it just makes sense to me that if you spend money like giving poor people what they need to fucking get by and then building out their infrastructure, that it makes it easier for them to get ahead in life. And we see this in Nordic countries, right? Some of the ones that shoot fucking sneaky debate man mentioned here. And also like Portugal, like somebody brought up negative mortgage loans, right? They did that like as a response to COVID, and other European countries have often given people negative mortgage loans as a response to like housing crisis being a thing, because they understand that, it's debt. They can take out a lot of it. They're a country. They can probably make it back later and be
It works.
Yeah, it just works.
Okay.
It just
works. Because the alternative is to bail out your banks when everything crashes.
You might see it as magic, but it has worked and it does work.